Dory Amos Lennox, how are you? I hope your body is treating you kindly. It was lovely to meet you when we did last year, I think. Now, you want to know what I consider to be my greatest achievement as a professional artist, and I can't think of a single this happened on that day thing. Winning the Brit in 1986 as Best Newcomer is the only award I can remember going up to a stage to receive. But thinking about this, I think that my greatest achievement is still being here actually after 40 years, still able to play live, audiences still seem to want to see us. Thank you very much. Touring in Australia, in New Zealand at the beginning of this year, to be able to still do this thing after 40 years, I think that's something to be proud of. So that's my answer, and I wish you well. Mandy Forsyth. If I could record with any artist, present or past, who would it be? Well, I did harbour the idea that I would like to work with Bonnie Raitt, to sing a duet with Bonnie Raitt, who I think has got an amazing voice, until my American label informed me that Bonnie Raitt would never consider working with a more contemporary artist, which we were at that time, but she would only consider people with a more of a substantial bluesy heritage, which is a shame, but it was only ever an idea. So to say, for example, would I like to have worked with the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin? Then yeah, of course. But again, it's not something I ever really considered, or what would that sound like? I guess it would be fun. I'll probably be terrified out of my life in the studio, is the truth of it. Is that an answer? I'm not even sure. Marianne Edworthy. If I could revisit any time in my career and do it again, when would it be? Well, I mean, obviously, the way that the industry has changed so much, it would be, I guess, the answer to that question would be 1985, when we had, a few months there where we were arguably proper pop stars and it was all going off, and I got to go to Japan for my first real live performances, a country I never even dreamed of visiting, and that was, 1985 was a blur. But having said that, of course, I was also terrified out of my life for most of the time. I can remember my manager saying to me, "But are you enjoying it, Pete?" And I'm not sure that I could honestly tell him that I was. I think Richard had a lot more fun, being, at least at that time, a bit less complicated, shall we say, than I was. And I was suffering from the fabulous imposter syndrome, waiting to be discovered any moment that I couldn't really do that thing, whatever that thing was. So, I don't know. 1985 was pretty good the way it was. I think maybe I'll leave it there. Julie Burdick, what was the band that influenced me? Well, Julie, I've no doubt that you're way too young to remember Free from the early 70s. Their best known song is probably All Right Now, which you've no doubt heard at some point in your life. But there was a time when there was an album by Free called Free Live, obviously a live recording, and I knew that album note for note. I could have sung you every note that Paul Rodgers sings on that album. I could sing you the mistakes I could have done once upon a time. It was imprinted on my psyche. So that was the band, Free really in the first place. But from then on, there have been many, many other influences. That was the first one. Liam, thank you for your question. Yes, worked with Peter John Vitesse, between 1985 and 1987, who was part of the Go West Band. What are my favourite memories of Pete? Well, Pete's a character, as you will know if you are a friend of his, and there were a few occasions, lots of things I could talk about here, but thinking about it, I'm going to settle for the moment that Pete was playing keyboards in the studio on a song called "The King Is Dead," and we had a very basic chordal framework. And Pete, as you all know, is an incredibly talented writer, producer, singer, pianist, keyboard player, and he really took our idea and flew with it, you know, in terms of the performance on that record. And we had really thought of it as more of a structured pop song, for want of a better description. So we only had a drum performance, which was, I don't know, say 3.5 minutes long. And at that point, when Peter was playing in the studio, everything else on the track dropped out. But we were frantically waving at Pete through the studio control room window to just keep playing, because what he was doing was so atmospheric and so fantastic. And he did keep playing, and that performance is somewhere in the Go West archive. I mean, it's on record, you can find it as the so-called long version of The King Is Dead, which includes what is effectively a piano solo by Pete, which was just spur of the moment, off the cuff, and utterly fantastic. What a genius that guy is. Helen, if I could play any character in a film, which film would it be? Who would I be in it, and why? I love film, and I've got huge respect for actors and the work they do, because the one time that I was ever required to speak on camera was in the Call Me video, when, if you have ever seen that video, I say to Richard, "What kept you?" 3 words. And I don't know that I could have done that any worse if I tried. So I don't think that I have the requisite skills to ever be an actor. But if we're talking fantasy, for the sake of the question, it would probably be a science fiction film. Blade Runner is one of my favourite films. And Rutger Hauer's character with the grey trench coat and the fabulous blonde hair, if only, is an image, at least, that I identify with. I certainly had a cheap version of that grey trench coat when we were touring in the 80s. So there was an element of identification there. Don't know if that makes any sense, but anyway, that'll have to do for your answer. Claire, do I have any regrets, business or personal? Well, the personal regrets are too personal to talk about here, but yes, of course I have regrets. There's a great line in a song by Narina Palo. The song's called Next Life, and I recommend it highly. Beautiful song. And to paraphrase, she says, "If you don't have regrets, my God, you ain't been living." And that resonates with me. I think, it's hard to go through life without making any mistakes or errors of judgment. But having said that, as I said earlier, I'm still here, reasonably unscathed. So I do have regrets, but at the same time, I consider myself to be very fortunate indeed. Dawn Haddad, will we ever tour in the States? We would love to, Dawn, but as I explained earlier, the pragmatic, the prosaic answer is, yes, we'll tour if someone offers us enough money to bring our own band and do it properly. That's how I should have answered the question the first time. David, there is a lot of male-oriented emotional content in a lot of Go West and my solo songs. Do you mean male, David? Is this from personal experience, or do I have the ability to read heartbreak? So I would say, as a songwriter, I'm always trying to write a lyric which a listener will be able to relate to. I think everyone surely has been disappointed, let's say, in love, and that is a universal theme. So I'm not going to make any grand claims to being able to read heartbreak, but I'm glad that some of the songs I've written resonate on that level, and that people can identify with the situations in them. Niall, how are you, mate? Hope you're well. Many a baseball situation to discuss, but we'll leave that for another time. Niall would like to know how I came to be in the band Terra Nova, which was arguably my first so-called professional gig. So I'll try to answer this question as concisely as I'm able. I had been working with / for John Glover, who now still manages Go West, and Tony Hadley actually. And John had put me on a retainer for a while when I was in my teens until he ran out of money. And John also gave me my first professional gig, which was singing backing vocals with an artist called Jim Capaldi, who was once the drummer in a band called Traffic and who was obviously managed by John. John was working out of an office at Shepperton Film Studios, and I was knocking about on the outskirts of his business endeavours. And the rhythm section from Manfred Mann's Earth Band, Chris Slade on drums and Colin Pattenden on bass, had found themselves at a loose end after Manfred had decided to form another Earth Band, which didn't include them. And they wanted to continue working as a band, so they put a band together, and I was the singer. An unwise choice on their part, but still, I was the singer in that band. And we made an album called Terra Nova. It came out in Switzerland only, I think, so it does exist as a rare hard copy. And if you've ever seen that album, there's a hilarious aside, which is a Spinal Tap kind of connotation about it. It's got this terrible logo on the front, which I have to admit I take responsibility for, although, as happened with the Stonehenge backdrop in Spinal Tap, what I was actually saying to the guys was we could have a logo that looks approximately like this, instead of which they just used my terrible drawing, and that was the artwork on the front of the cover, my God. Anyway, I'm digressing, which is entirely to be expected. So we made an album called Terra Nova, and we went on tour in Germany. And at that time, Bronze Records, who were Manfred Mann's label, they had obviously been unaware of the fact that Manfred had told Chris and Colin, sure, you can call yourselves Earth Band if you want to. And that was the label under which we went to Germany on tour. Can't remember if it was Earth Band without Manfred or if it was just Earth Band. Anyway, we went out as Earth Band. We played Blinded by the Light, which is a well-known song by Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Davey's on the Road Again, probably, another hit by that band. And we were on the road in Germany, and we arrived at a venue which looked suspiciously closed. And we hammered on the door until someone came and answered, and we said, Earth Band playing here tonight? And the guy said, not here, mate. And that was when we found out that Bronze Record had finally slapped an injunction on Colin and Chris to stop them from using the name Earth Band. And I spent that evening in Chris Slade's hotel room taking down his statement in preparation for being arrested on his re-arrival back into the UK. But yeah, it was a great experience. I've got many stories to tell, obviously, but that's how I came to be in Terra Nova. Hope that made sense, Niall. Stuart, how difficult a decision was it for me to go solo from Go West? As I've said many times before, by the time that tour, 93, came around, Richard and I had been in each other's pockets, writing, recording, playing live, touring, promoting. And for me, at least, a certain amount of the joy had gone out of that relationship. It was, the exterior pressures as well on us as friends had made it less fun. And I definitely needed a break, even if Richard didn't. And we'd spent a good deal of time in America living together. We lived together Not sure whether that was the greatest idea. When we were making the Indian Summer album, when we obviously had a hit in America finally with The King of Wishful Thinking, and I had really fallen in love with California and wanted to spend more time there. And Richard, I think it's fair to say, was over California, much more of an Anglophile, apologies, than I am, at least at that time. And he wanted to come back to the UK. So that was another part of my decision I wanted to relocate to California, and I fooled myself into thinking that I could be successful on my own, which success is questionable. But that's how that happened. So yes, it wasn't that difficult a decision for me. I had made up my mind that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to live in California, certainly. So yeah, it wasn't really a planned thing. It was just a feeling that came upon me over the passage of time, and is this really fun anymore? And I guess I decided that for me, at least at that time, it wasn't as much fun as it had been. Craig also asks, what artists would I like to work with? I answered this question in a roundabout kind of way earlier. And I don't really think too much about artists I'd like to duet with. I mean, I'm a big fan of Narina Palo, but she does a very different thing brilliantly. So I'm not sure that would be a match made in heaven. There are a number of fantastic female singers around at the moment that I admire hugely. Anne-Marie makes amazing records on What a Voice, but again, I can't really envisage a video with Anne-Marie standing next to me singing a duet. Donna Missel, people know that I'm a huge fan of Donna Missel, fantastic singer from New Jersey in America, I think. She's moved into a sort of electronic dance format, which is less my kind of thing, but her singer-songwriter album, Lighter, was fantastic, and I've sung a couple of those songs from that album as covers. I think Jupiter from Seaglass is from that album. Maybe it's not, maybe it's from earlier. Anyway, I'm rambling as usual. Fantastic singers all. Annette Furuyama, forgive me Annette, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your name. Thank you for your question. When I started my career from BVs, was that the plan all along? I never thought of myself specifically as a backing vocalist, just as a singer. Certainly I did backing vocal sessions. And was that my plan all along? I never really had a plan, Annette. If I had a plan, I think I'd have been more successful. But I just sort of trundled along, following the path of least resistance, and got lucky on several occasions. That's the truth of it, really. So, yeah. Graham, will there be a deluxe edition of Indian Summer, as there have been to the first two Go West albums? That has been the plan. I'm not absolutely sure that it's going to go ahead, but you'll just have to watch his space, Graham, and thank you very much for your question. As I say, I think it will materialise, but I'm not in charge, so I can't tell you definitively. Linda Huxford asks if I can do a cover of Al Green's Let's Stay Together at the Concord Club. I think that's not likely to happen, actually, to be honest, although what a fantastic song. But again, I've tackled some fantastic songs as a singer and wondered in the process and afterwards, why did I say I would do this? Because, such an iconic song and a fantastic vocal performance by Al Green. It's a tough act to follow. So I'm afraid I have to disappoint you on this occasion. Sylvie, how many rehearsals with the band do I have before I say, yes, we are ready? To put this in context, before we played any shows as Go West, we went to a rehearsal facility at Bray Film Studio, where after we had rehearsed, we did production rehearsals. Admittedly, At that point we had a lighting rig that we had designed for us, so there was a production rehearsal that needed to be had. But prior to that, we and the entire band stayed at the house of a bass player called John Giblin, fantastic bass player, which was it had accommodation. I can't think of the right word. So we stayed at this place for 2 weeks, mainly eating apple crumble and custard, as I remember, and rehearsing for 90 minutes a day or something for 2 weeks. Those were indeed the days. Because now, if we can get away without having a rehearsal, that is necessary because of how expensive everything is. I know it's boring to talk about money, but this is the answer to the question. For my tour in September, we will rehearse for 1 long day. And that will be all the rehearsal I can afford, is the answer to your question. And these guys, these players, these singers are so fantastic, and they work really hard preparing their parts, what they're going to do in these tunes, so that 1 day's rehearsal is at least partly about making sure we're all on the same page with this or that, making sure things start and finish where they are supposed to. But it's also about setting up our on-stage monitoring and making sure that the first show goes as smoothly as possible.